Shalom and welcome to 2 Minutes of Torah. This shir is entitled Tension Between the Agricultural System and the Halachik System. In the early morning shir, we're learning Gemara Tanit and the praise of Mordechai Geshem and the request of V'tain Tal. And we've seen three areas where there's a little bit of a tension here, in a good way, of course, between the agricultural system and the Halachik system. What do I mean? Let's take a look at three separate sugyot. Number one, the V'tain Tal that we have in Israel, we begin Zayin Cheshvan. Why? Because the pilgrims from the Beis Mikdash are only coming back. They're reaching the furthest area away in the northern part of Israel only after 2 weeks. It takes 2 weeks to travel. It takes actually a few more weeks, but they have to hurry up because we really want to start the rain already. We wanted to start the rain request earlier on, right after the Chag, as early as possible. But the pilgrims are traveling, so it really should take a few weeks. We tell them, hurry up. We'll wait a little bit for you for 15 days of traveling, even though it should take more. You move along, go at a quicker pace, travel at night, and then we're going to ask the Zayin Cheshvan. So the big question is, there are no pilgrims today, what do you do? So the Ran says you should adjust. If there's no pilgrims, then go according to agricultural time. That should be earlier on in the season, closer to Sukkot, not the 7th of Cheshvan. And he says, but what am I going to do? The Rif and the Rambam both say Zayin Cheshvan, that's the time. So you'd think he'd say, okay, they hold low plug, there's a fixed takana, and we don't just start tampering and changing halachas around. So here there's a fixed halacha, it's a takana. You do it on the 7th, 15 days after the holiday's over, because of the pilgrims, and even if there's no pilgrims, that's the way halacha works. So you have takanot to set up. He says, no, even the Rambam and the Rif, the only reason they hold this way is because there's still pilgrims that go to Yerushalayim in Tishrei and Sukkot. Even though there's no Mikdash, there's still pilgrims, and because of those pilgrims, we wait and we give them the time. He's not ready to go ahead and say low plug here. Why? It would seem the reason is because asking for rain is our life. This is our life, asking for sustenance. So to go ahead and say, well, the rabbis made a takana to wait for the pilgrims, and even though the reason doesn't apply, even though our lives are hanging by a thread, we need the rain every day. Well, no, there's a takana, we have to hold off because of the takana from a few thousand years ago. The Ran just can't swallow it. He says, I understand the Halachik system, and I understand our concern for the pilgrims, but to say the takana, the decree, applies when the reason doesn't apply and we're losing out agriculturally, and we're not crying out to Hashem for rain when we need it? But does anyone bring an idea there is a takana here? Yes. Aruch HaShulchan Kuf Zayin Sif Bet. He writes that there's a takana. It's a low plug. Once Allah was set up, it was set up, and that's the way it is. Agriculturally, it's so hard. Okay, we have a system of Allah, and you have to perpetuate the system of Allah. We don't play around with it, and that's the way it is, he says. Then Rosh Hashanah comes along and says, what happens if you forgot the same bracha? And you said V'tain Tal right after Sukkot. He says, you don't have to go back. Why? Once we say the halacha is V'tain Tal is only on the 7th, either because of the takana or because there's still pilgrims today, but that's halacha. He says an unbelievable thing. This is in Halachik Shlomo, Perak Shvini, Halacha Yudchet, chapter 8, Halacha 18. He says what? That still it's true there's still pilgrims today, like the Ran says. Yeah, but today a pilgrim who's traveling on the road, coming back from the Mikdash, the traveling conditions, we have cars, we have buses, he doesn't say that, but I assume that's what he means. It's not going to be such a kilkul, it's not going to be so harmful if the pilgrim is rained on the way back, so therefore, agriculturally, it's really a good request. In terms of the takana, he doesn't just say, oh, it's a takana and it's fixed and that's it. Rather, he says, really, it's not so damaging to this pilgrim, and therefore we can't say that request of V'tain Tal is such a negative one, and once he said it, we don't make him go back and daven. It's like an unbelievable Shlomo on Orba. Once again, we have this takana, we have the reason behind the takana of the pilgrims, doesn't really apply anymore, but it does apply to some degree, but the travelers today are not bothered as much, so b'diavad, your request was a legitimate agricultural request. You don't have to go back. It's an incredible chiddush, and Isha Yisrael brings that down. So once again, you see this play over here. Another area where you see this is by Bavel, where Bavel doesn't need rain. Iraq doesn't need rain. The Gemara already said until the 60th day from the equinox. So the Rosh says, yeah, it's very nice for Bavel. What about other areas in Europe? He says it makes sense they should have rain and ask for rain earlier. Why go by Bavel? Oh, it was a low plug takana? It doesn't make sense, he says. And he says Provence does that way, that they ask at a different time, and that makes sense. But others reject it. Once again, do we have a set takana around the world for Chutz La'aretz? Or do you say, wait, agriculturally, what's best for this country? What's best for Europe? Forget about what Bavel. What's the best for Bavel? And then another question comes up, the Southern Hemisphere. The Piskei Teshuvos and Kufiyah Dalit brings down the question of the Southern Hemisphere, where then the whole rain season is backwards from ours. So it wasn't dealt with in the Gemara Rishonim. Mishmur doesn't have it either, but poskim have dealt with it, and he quotes them. Some of them saying, "Yeah, we have to adjust it. Our system of request for rain should be based on our agricultural needs, and should we have a takana that doesn't work with us?" And you see the tension over there once again between a takana, where this is the way it was set up a few thousand years ago in the Gemara, versus what's best for the agricultural needs. Amazing. So again, finally, the equinox. If you say it's 60 days after the Tukufah, the equinox, that's the best time to ask. So now the equinox begins in the middle of the day. And if you want to go 60 days from there, that's going to be at 3 o'clock. So what if I daven Marav December 4th at night? I forget V'tain Tal Matar. Well, really, the equinox it's not 60 days since the equinox, so maybe it's all right. What about I daven Shacharis and didn't hit 60 days since the equinox? What about if I daven an early Mincha? So the Rosh brings down the Ravya that it should be precise from the 60 days from the equinox to the minute. And the B'ya Halacha in the beginning of Kufiyah Zayin brings that opinion down. The Chai Adam quotes it and says, yeah, maybe if you messed up at Marav or Shacharis or Mincha, if it was before the 60 days from the exact minute of the equinox, maybe don't go back. Then he quotes the Pri Megadah says, I don't know, you probably should go back. The Takana was set for nighttime when the Jewish day begins. And maybe go ahead and daven out of Safek at Tanai, the Dava, and then he brings in the Gra, who says, no, we rejected that halacha totally, and of course you have to go back and daven again. But once again, if you go by equinox and what's a precise time, agriculturally, it should be by the minute. Be'et la'es, it's called. Or do you say, no, it goes by the beginning of the Halachik day, and that's it. Once again, to summarize, we have the sugya in Eretz Yisrael, the pilgrims who don't really exist, do they exist anymore? Does it affect them or not? And then what's best agriculturally. Then you have in Chutz La'aretz. Do you go ahead and say you go by Bavel? Or you really look at each town in Europe and you look at the Southern Hemisphere? And then the third topic is you go by the equinox precisely. You know what to do. The Jewish day begins, which is December 4th at night. That's what you do. So it's an amazing area where in all details we see there's like a tension, a good tension between the halachic system where we keep everything precise, we don't start tampering with things. On the other hand, there's agricultural needs, and why we do have to ask in a precise way what is best for my time and my location. And you see, in each case, it's really worked by the poskim. Shalom.